This is something that happened during my freshman year of college. It was a few years ago now, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. At the time, I went to a university with about 10,000 students. For my first year, I lived in an all-female dorm building on the 3rd floor. There were 4 floors total, and I had my own dorm room all to myself. On probably the 3rd or 4th week of school, I went to bed one night just like any other. It was a weeknight, but I don't remember exactly what day. I woke up though at around 3 o'clock in the morning and really had to use the bathroom. The bathrooms were just a ways down the hallway, so I got out of bed and headed to the door. When I got out into the hallway, it was empty and things were very quiet. I had to walk maybe between 50 and 100 feet to get to the bathrooms. Once I was there, the bathrooms that we had was basically a room with 5 doors and a sink. Each door was its own little private bathroom. Nobody was inside, and all of the doors were open when I got there. Not surprising for it being 3 o'clock in the morning. As I was inside one of the rooms, I heard footsteps come from the hallway. Whoever it was then entered the bathrooms and went into one of the rooms across from me. I didn't think too much of it. I was inside for maybe a minute and then left. When I did, the other person was still inside the one across from me. Basically, right when I got back into the hallway, I heard the other bathroom door open. Then, when I was maybe 30 feet away from the bathrooms walking to my room, I heard them start walking in the hallway behind me. I still didn't think much of it at the time, and I expected it to be another girl. But something about it just seemed odd. I don't really know why. I looked over my shoulder to see who it was, but when I did, I saw that it was a man. And it wasn't a college-aged man either. This guy looked much older than me. I was really confused by this. I turned back and kept walking from my room. But instantly, I heard the man speed up his steps. He was walking pretty fast and starting to gain on me. I got a really bad feeling and I sped up as well. By now, I was pretty close to my door and I hadn't locked it with me only going to the bathroom. That was good, meaning I could get inside faster. I could hear the man still getting closer and closer to me, and I started to feel panic setting into my mind. Now, I was only about 10 feet away, and the guy was less than 20 feet behind me. When I got to the door, I quickly opened it, got inside, and then shut the door and locked it behind me. Probably a second later, the guy stopped right outside my door. He then tried opening the door, and my heart started racing even faster than it already was. Then he knocked on it. I had no clue who this guy was or what he wanted. I knew that he wasn't supposed to be here though. I chose not to answer the door. I also didn't bother to ask him what he was doing or who he was. There was about 30 seconds of silence after he knocked. I was hoping that he would have gone away, but then he knocked on the door again. It wasn't a very loud knock at all, and after he knocked, I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. He was sort of short and wearing a black jacket and had sort of blonde hair. I didn't know who he was. He definitely didn't work at the school or anything either. He knocked again for a 3rd time. I really wanted him to just go away. There was no way that I was going to be able to get any sleep with this guy here. He didn't say anything the entire time, but was just standing there. I went away from the door and sat on my bed. I waited, and the guy didn't knock for a really long time. But when I went back over to the door and looked out, thinking maybe he was gone, the guy was still there. I didn't know what to do. I walked back over to my bed. Then the guy knocked one more time. It was really quiet, and I just barely heard it because of how quiet it was. I didn't get up to look. I stayed where I was, and probably 10 more minutes went by. I didn't hear any noises and got up to look again. That's when I saw that the guy was finally gone. After that, I was finally able to get back to sleep. The next morning, I found my resident advisor and told her about the man. She said that she was going to report it. Luckily, I never saw the guy again after that. A few days later, though, I found out that the man had been let into the building much earlier that night. He had told a student that his daughter lived there and he had to give her something. The student let him in, believing his story. It turned out that it was a complete lie, and he must have hid somewhere for hours. I get really creeped out thinking about it. Campus security was informed of the situation, but I never heard anything more of him. In fall of 2019, I was a freshman in college. I went to a smaller school and I lived in the dorms. I had a roommate named Danny who was a real jerk. But that's not the horror story. Sure, it was annoying to be in that small dorm room with Danny. He would talk a lot and pester me on purpose a lot of times. Because of this, I tried to spend as much time away from our dorm room as possible. I would do all my studying in different places around campus. Spots to sit and get work done were everywhere, in just about every building. Even if I wasn't doing homework, I could sit and watch YouTube videos or whatever. I preferred it to being in my dorm room if Danny was there. I got into a routine of this after probably the first month. So one night, I remember that I was doing homework in this one building. It was the building that a lot of our classrooms were in and had several different subjects. There were about 4 floors to it, and I was up on the 3rd or 4th floor, but I don't remember which one. I was in a comfortable chair that had a table attached to it. It was built for studying and stuff. There were a few of these types of chairs that looked out a window that had a nice view of campus. I took a break at about 6 p.m. and went to the dining hall to eat. I met up with a friend there, and then afterwards went back to the same building at the same spot that I was at before to finish my homework. The buildings didn't close if you were a student, and you could stay there as long as you wanted. By now, especially up on one of the top floors, things were very quiet, and nobody else was really around. I kept working, and was there until probably like 9 p.m. As I worked, I had my headphones in, and played some music in the background. Sometimes I would do that, and sometimes I wouldn't. It just depended on what I was doing and how I felt. So right after I was done, and I took my headphones out, I heard footsteps behind me immediately. The walkway went behind me, and one direction led to some classrooms, and the other led to some stairs. The footsteps were coming from the hallway with some classrooms in it. I started picking up my laptop and putting things into my backpack. As I did, the footsteps got closer and closer. It didn't seem like the person was going to walk by me, though. It almost seemed like they were going to approach me instead. I turned around to look and see who it was. All I saw, though, was somebody ducking around a corner behind a beam. I didn't get a look at the person, but just saw part of them for like a second. This was kind of weird. I finished putting my things in my backpack and then stood up, looking to where I saw the person again. I still saw nothing. Then I walked over to the stairs and left the building. I went back to my dorm after that. But the very next day, there was a similar experience. This time, after studying in a different building, I went to the Performing Arts building to study that night. This building was almost always pretty quiet. There were much less classrooms inside of it, and unless there was a concert or something going on, not many people would be there. I studied in peace for basically the whole time, and saw only about 2 or 3 people walking by in the entire time that I was in there. For the last 2 hours probably, I saw nobody at all. The location that I was studying in was on the 1st floor and next to a staircase, where there was a table and chair set up for studying. It was kind of out of the way, but there was a hallway going past and another one that connected. I did not have my headphones in this time and could hear everything around me. Things were very quiet, and it soon got to be kind of late. At one point, though, I heard footsteps coming from down the hallway. Just when these footsteps were about to get into my view, though, they stopped. It was like just around the corner where I couldn't see. There was no room that I was aware of right there either. It was like the person had just stopped in their tracks. If they went back the other way or moved at all, I would have heard them. What were they doing? Were they just standing there? I had no idea. I decided to pack up my stuff and head back to my dorm. When I did, I didn't hear anything. Luckily for me, I did not have to walk past that hallway, and I would be going the other way. When I left, as soon as I started heading down the hallway, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they followed me, but were still out of my sight. Then I heard them start to get closer and within my view. I turned around to see who it was that was there. I did it very quickly to not be weird, so I didn't get a good look at the person, but I did see them. There was a tall and thin-looking guy, walking a little ways back, behind me. It seemed as though he was walking pretty fast. This was way too weird, and as I walked, I passed by an exit door. It wasn't one of the main entrances or exits to the building, but at the last moment, I turned and I left. Once I was out of there, I headed back for the main area of campus. The guy didn't leave the building, whoever it was. I wondered if this was the same person who had been there the previous night. I went back to my dorm room, and after that, decided to take a break from studying around campus at night. As much as I didn't like to study in my dorm room with Danny, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. But the story doesn't quite end there. A few days later, I had classes like normal and was gone for most of the day. I returned to our dorm in the late afternoon, and Danny was there. When I got into the room, he told me that someone had come by and asked for me. Apparently, somebody knocked on our door, and when Danny answered, a guy asked if I was there. I asked Danny what the guy looked like, and he said tall and thin, and basically described the same guy that I had seen the other night. I asked if the guy said what he wanted with me. He didn't say, though. Apparently, he just walked away. After that, I never saw the man again. I went to a pretty big college. It was several hours from the city where I'm from, and a few of my high school classmates also went there. This is something that happened during my junior year. I lived in a house with 3 of my friends, 2 of which went to high school with me as well. It was a 2-story house that we lived in and somewhat small, but enough space for all of us. When the school year started, I had a lot of students in most of my classes because of how big our school was. One class in particular had about 200 kids in it. I would go to the lectures each time on Mondays and Wednesdays when they were held, and I would usually sit in the same spot. It was a large room with many seats in it. Over time, I would see a lot of the same faces in class, but I didn't really have any good friends in this particular class. One of the people who would always seem to sit around me was this one guy. He would usually sit a few rows behind me, and he was sort of tall and had dark brown hair. I never really paid much attention to him, but I just recognized him. But I began noticing him more when he started to seemingly be following me home. It started one day after class, when I walked out of the building and just happened to notice him walking behind me. I would drive to class and back because I lived off campus, so I would go to a parking lot, get in my car, and then leave. He happened to park near me, so he did the same. As far as I knew, this was just a coincidence. I would never pay attention to who was driving behind me. But there was this one time that I didn't go straight home, but went to the school cafeteria instead. I noticed this guy walk behind me the whole time, and he also went to the cafeteria. I still didn't think much of it and thought it was maybe a coincidence. After I got inside and got food, I'm not really sure which way he went because I was just minding my own business. But the very next day of class that we had, I left to go straight home and went to my car. For whatever reason, I noticed the guy again as he went to his car, which was parked a little ways from mine. But this time, I noticed him driving behind me all the way until I got to my place. When I parked on the side of the street in front of our house, he kept driving past me. One of the next times that we had class, he followed me in his car again, but I wasn't driving back to my place this time. This time, I went to a gas station to get gas, and he just happened to do the same thing. Something about this seemed really weird. Was it a coincidence, or was he always following me? I decided to ask around the class the next time that we had it. There were a few people who I usually sat by. They weren't necessarily friends, but I would occasionally talk to them about things from the class. I pointed out the guy to them and asked if they knew anything about him. None of them did, though. I brought the guy up to my roommates as well, but they didn't seem to have any idea who the guy was. It was a mystery to me. But then, the guy just stopped showing up to class. I remember he wasn't there for like 4 or 5 times in a row. I wondered why, but I was actually glad that he wasn't in class anymore, because he was seeming to be following me. Then, one night, I was returning home from my on-campus part-time job that I had. It was dark out, and when I got to my street, I saw a man walking down the sidewalk in front of our house. As I got closer, I noticed it was the same guy. I did not want to park my car in the street close to him, or have to see him at all, so I kept driving and passed by our house. I couldn't believe that I saw him. I was telling myself that he must have lived close to me in this general neighborhood. After I left our street, I drove around the block to get back to our street again. It took me maybe a minute or so, and I was expecting the guy to be gone when I got back. But when I pulled around again, he was still there. He was just kind of standing around, or pacing almost. The area that he was in was right by where I park my car every day. I had a really bad feeling, and I didn't want to take any chances, so I kept driving and decided not to go home. Instead, I headed back towards campus and called one of my roommates. I told her about the guy in front of our house, and she went to check out the front window and told me that she saw him. She did not know who he was, and told me she would let me know if he went away. I got a call about 20 minutes later that he had finally left the area. Then, once more, I drove back home. After getting back, I looked around the street and was quick to get inside the house. I didn't see the guy at all. Not too long after that, I went upstairs to go to bed. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but one of my roommates soon woke me up. She told me that the guy was back and that she had already called the police. I was really confused at first and didn't know what was going on, but she led me into her bedroom, which had a window that looked out to the back of our house. In the backyard, we looked down and saw the guy was standing at the back door, seemingly trying to open it. She said he had been there for a while. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning at that time. We waited upstairs and hoped that the guy wouldn't get in, and luckily, he didn't. When we heard the sound of a car driving down the street, it stopped by our house, and then we saw the man try to run away. However, he ended up being stopped by the police not too far from our house. I remember I heard that he claimed he was trying to get to his friend's house, and he mixed up the address. We all knew that was a lie. It turned out the guy didn't even go to our school and was never enrolled there. All those times he was in class with me, who knows what his real intentions were. This happened just a couple of years ago. I was in college at the time, but went to a smaller school. I have a good friend group from high school, and we remain close to this day, but several of us went to different colleges. A few went to a much bigger school, which was a little bit more fun to hang out at. It was only about an hour away from the college that I went to, so on a few occasions, I went and visited for a weekend. I remember that one time, during I believe my 3rd year of college, I went to visit 2 of my friends, Jake and Sam, at the larger school. I went down on Friday after classes and hung out with my friends later that day. We were going to go to the university football game the next day on Saturday. But before that, on Friday night, my friends and a few of their college friends were going out to some of the local bars. We left to go there at probably like 10 p.m., and we decided to walk because I was told it would only take about 10 minutes. I was with Jake and Sam to start, but Sam soon left us because he said he had to stop and get something at one of his friend's dorms quick, so he would meet us there. Our route to getting there went right through the center of campus. Now, I had been there a couple of times in the past, but this school was very large, and I didn't know the campus all that well. At this hour, things were dark, and really nobody else was around, other than some people on the main sidewalks. We took a shortcut through a courtyard near some buildings, which I assumed had classrooms in them, but I wasn't really sure. I suddenly really had to use the bathroom, and when we passed by a building, I asked Jake if I could use the bathroom in one of the buildings. He was like, "Sure, go ahead." I didn't really know what the buildings were or if they would be locked, but when I went to the door and tried it, it was open. Jake then got a phone call and he stayed outside. I told him that I would be right back, and I entered the building. When I got inside, there were a few hallways and a lounge type of area. I didn't know exactly what type of building it was still. Nobody else seemed to be inside. There was no bathroom in immediate sight, so I started walking around to try and find one. I kept expecting one to be right around the corner or really close by, but there just wasn't one. At last, after probably 5 minutes of wandering around the building, I found a bathroom. I used it and was back out in less than a minute, but now I didn't really know how to get back. I thought that I knew the way and started going there, but I soon heard footsteps coming. They were walking kind of fast in my direction. I didn't know if I was even supposed to be in here, and I wasn't a student at the school, so I decided to wait out of sight. I went back around the corner, hoping for the footsteps to pass by. Instead of passing me, though, they turned the corner and headed to where I was. In a split-second decision, I moved back and went up a staircase, which happened to be right there. After walking up, I was now a floor higher, and everything looked mostly the same on the second floor. But I heard the footsteps starting to walk up the stairs. They were also moving faster than before. Somebody seemed to be after me for some reason. I started to worry that I really wasn't supposed to be in this building and would get in trouble. I walked as fast as I could without running through a random hallway. I was trying to make my way back towards the entrance and find another staircase or something. When I went down a couple more hallways, I heard the person behind me go down each way that I went. They were still a ways back though and couldn't see me. I didn't know who this person was that was chasing me. I kind of thought that it was silly, and I considered just stopping and seeing who it was. But for some reason, I just felt like that wasn't a good idea. For some reason, I felt like I was maybe in danger. I kept walking, changing hallways every so often. I tried going in a random room at one point, but it was locked. Then I came up on an elevator. I decided to take it and push the button. Thankfully, it opened immediately. If I would have had to wait, I probably would have just moved on. I got inside and started pushing the button for the first floor over and over. Meanwhile, I heard the footsteps coming from down the hallway. They were moving faster and faster, and then they started running. Whoever this was now sprinting towards me. Finally, the elevator doors started to close. At about that same time, the person had entered the hallway that I was in. The doors just barely closed on time. When they were maybe an inch open, I heard whoever it was get right outside and then just barely saw them. I couldn't tell anything about them though, just that they were right outside. They grabbed at the door, but it was too late. I felt a huge wave of relief as the elevator started moving down. But at this same time, I heard the person sprinting away from the elevator. I was guessing that they were now going to the nearest staircase. When the elevator door opened, to my surprise, I could see the exit. I think it was the same door that I had gone in. I turned to the right and started walking. That's when I heard footsteps coming from a ways to the left. Whoever it was that was chasing me was almost down the stairs. That's when I started to run. I sprinted towards the exit and heard the other person sprinting in my direction now. Just when I was about to get to the door, I saw something go flying past my head and I heard a loud smash. Whoever this person was had thrown a small lamp at me. It just missed my head and hit the wall just a couple of feet away. I opened up the door and sprinted outside. My friend Jake was still on the phone, but a ways down, probably like 50 feet. He saw me running and looked confused. But as I was approaching him still, I saw the look on his face as he saw somebody come barreling out of the building behind me. Then he started running with me. We were both pretty fast, and now that we were outside, had many more options on where to run. We quickly made a right and ran a ways, then made it to another street. When we did, we finally stopped and realized that the person wasn't chasing us anymore. Jake asked me what that was all about, and I told him that I didn't know. We were able to meet up with our other friends after that, but I felt really lucky to have made it out of that situation okay. I really don't know who that person was. The crazy thing is that I never even saw them. Jake told me that it was a man, and he said that he didn't get a real good look at him, but he said the guy looked insane. I will take his word for it. The fact that the guy threw a lamp at me is really bad. It could have injured me, and I'm glad that the guy didn't catch up with me either. Who knows what he would have done. I also feel like the guy was not supposed to be in the building. I didn't see him for the rest of the time that I was there that weekend. Since then, I've been back at that college a couple of times, but I will never forget that experience. My senior year of college, I lived in what I would describe as a typical college house. It was old, sort of run down, had 2 stories and an unfinished basement. I was renting it with one other roommate, a girl named Katie who I had met my freshman year. We had become pretty good friends and shared a dorm our sophomore year of college. So one time, Katie went home for the weekend to see her family. She left on Friday and was going to be gone until Sunday night. On Friday night, I went out with some friends. We would go out on weekends all the time, but this time I had to be up the next morning because I had work, so I decided to try not to stay out too late. Everything about the night was normal, and I returned back home at probably about 11 p.m. When I got home, I went upstairs to get ready for bed. Maybe 20 minutes or so after I got home, there was a knock at the front door. It had to be one of my friends or something because of how late it was. The neighborhood was pretty standard for being about a mile outside of a college campus, and was pretty quiet usually. I walked downstairs and went over to the window to look to see who was there before answering the door. I had a sort of weird feeling about it right from the start though. Maybe it was because of the fact that I was alone, or maybe because if it was a friend, they probably would have contacted me first. They would have texted me or called me before just coming over. When I looked out the window, I saw that there was a man standing there who I didn't recognize. Now, it was really dark out, and I didn't have a great view, but I was still pretty confident that I had never seen this guy before. This seemed strange, and I wasn't going to answer the door, so I went back upstairs and hoped that the guy would just go away. He knocked a couple of more times, but eventually stopped, and I went down to check and see if he was gone. He was, and I felt better. I then went back upstairs and got into bed, but just a few minutes after that, I heard the knocking again. I went down to check, and the guy was there again. He was standing right outside the front door. There was no way that I was answering, but I did want to know what he wanted. I stayed in the living room as the man knocked a few more times. He stayed there for probably 2 or 3 minutes. Then, finally, I heard him walking away. I was just happy that he was gone again, but just hoped that he was gone for good this time. I waited around downstairs for probably 10 minutes, and the guy didn't return. Then I went back upstairs again to finally go to bed. I got into my room, turned out all the lights, and got into bed. I closed my eyes, but no more than a minute later, I heard a noise from downstairs. It was the sound of our back door opening. I couldn't believe it. Instantly, I jumped up and ran over to my door. I locked it and then went back over and grabbed my phone to call the police. I couldn't really hear the guy walking around downstairs, but could just barely hear some noises. When I called the police, I went and hid under my bed. I was lucky to have a lock on my door, but I still didn't know who this guy was or what he was capable of. I was terrified. When I was on the phone with the police, I stayed on the line with them the entire time until they arrived. I didn't hear anything coming from downstairs, and I didn't hear the man coming upstairs either. It took maybe 10 minutes, and then the police were there. They entered through the back door, which was open, but did not find the man after searching the house. They also searched the property as well, but the man was never found. He must have left before they got there. I was just happy that he was gone. Obviously, I always remembered to lock the back door after that. Still, I wonder who the man was and why he chose our house. This story takes place a few years ago when I first started college as a freshman. I was at a pretty big school, but I didn't know anybody there. I was 4 hours away from home and in a different state. I lived on one of the freshman dorm buildings and on the 5th floor, which was the top floor. On what was the first week of classes, I got ready for bed one night to go to sleep. All of the lights were off in my room and it was pitch black. I had just set my alarm and closed my eyes to try to fall asleep when suddenly I heard my door open. I quickly opened my eyes and looked over my shoulder to the doorway. My room was still very dark, other than just a little bit of light now coming in because of the door being opened. I saw there was someone standing in the doorway, holding open the door. I couldn't tell at all who it was though, because of how dark it was. All I saw was just a figure. I didn't know anybody at this school yet, so I figured somebody must be here by accident. I called out asking them who they were, but they didn't answer me. I then said to them, "I think you have the wrong room." They still didn't answer me. Instead, I saw the figure suddenly move into my room instead of leaving, and then shut the door behind them and lock it. It was now completely dark once again, and I couldn't see anything at all. Everything went completely silent after that. Within a few seconds of this, I was beyond creeped out and started reaching around for my phone, which I had placed on my desk to charge. As I was doing this, I suddenly felt my right arm being grabbed by someone. I jumped up and off my bed and yanked my arm away as fast as I could. I then yelled as loud as I could for them to get away from me. I ran for the direction of the door and slammed into it, banging my shoulder pretty hard. I felt around for the lock and then unlocked the door and opened it. I then ran out into the hallway and found my RA's room and knocked on their door. Luckily, they were still awake. I told them what had happened, and now that I wasn't alone, I felt better about going back to my room to confront whoever was there. We both walked there and then opened the door, ready for anything. I turned on the light, and we both saw that the room was now empty. I guess whoever had been in there somehow left. I don't know how they would have left though, because I was in the hallway the entire time. There was really nothing else to do at that point, other than to tell my story to the RA, who said he would inform the school. I always made sure my door was locked after that, and didn't have another problem. However, I always wonder who did that to me, and why. I graduated from college a couple of years ago. I'm a female, and I went to a relatively smaller college to get my undergraduate degree. When I was at that school, my first year, I lived on campus in a dorm building. I was able to walk to all of my classes and back because of this. The floor of my dorm that I lived on was an all-female floor, which was the 3rd floor. I remember that after one of my first days of class, I was in bed by probably 11 p.m. I had the whole dorm room to myself and fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up sometime in the night, though, to a knock on my door. I was so tired, and I could see it was still dark out. After rubbing my eyes, I looked at the clock to see that it was 3 a.m. There was once again another set of knocks on my door. I couldn't imagine why anybody would be knocking on my door at this hour, and I did not want to answer it. Eventually, it stopped, but then I heard another noise. It sounded like a man laughing. I could just barely hear it, but that's what it seemed to be. And not a younger man, but a sort of older-sounding man. Finally, it sounded like whoever was there walked away, because I heard footsteps moving in the other direction, and no longer heard the laughing. I wasn't sleepy anymore, and I decided to get out of bed and look out my peephole. When I did, I didn't see anybody there, so I opened the door quietly and looked down the hallway. At the very end, I saw what appeared to be a man walking at the end of the hallway towards the stairs. He looked much older than college age. I quickly shut my door and closed it again as soon as I saw him. After that, I made sure my door was locked and went back to bed. The next day was another normal day of classes for me. I happened to have a night class on that particular day, which I wasn't too thrilled about, but it was a class that I needed, and it was only available at night. The class went from 7 to 8:30 p.m., and I walked there that night. There was only about 15 other kids or so in the class, and I sat at a desk in the back of the room and got out my laptop to take notes. I happened to be the only person in the back 2 rows of desks in that classroom. As I was taking notes on my laptop and listening to the professor, I happened to look over to the back door of the classroom. The door was just a little bit behind where I was sitting, and as I looked over to it, I noticed there was someone looking in. I saw the face of an older guy looking directly at me with a really creepy-looking smile. He kept looking at me for a good 5 seconds or so, before suddenly ducking down. After that, I looked back over to the window of the door several more times, but thankfully he didn't come back. When class ended, I packed up my laptop and began walking back to my dorm. It was maybe a 10-minute walk across the campus. By now, it was dark out, and the campus was pretty quiet. As I walked back on the sidewalk, it didn't take long before I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't feel the need to look back until they started getting closer and closer. I knew I wasn't walking that slow, so I turned back. When I did, I saw the same guy who I had seen when I was in class. The guy was looking at me, and when I saw him, he began to smile again and then started to laugh. I recognized his laugh. This had to be the same guy who was knocking on my door in the middle of the night. I started walking faster, but the man began to run. I then started running to try to get away from him. I ran off from the sidewalk and into the road. The man followed. This road was quiet at this time of night, but in the distance, I could see a campus safety vehicle. It was parked on the side of the road, and I ran directly towards it, and as I got closer, it noticed me. This is when the man seemed to notice too, and he stopped chasing me, and instead he started running in another direction. When I reached the campus safety car, I told the officer what was going on. The man had pretty much gotten away by then, but the officer radioed to the police as well as the other campus safety officers. I went back to my dorm after that. I was pretty scared for a few days, but luckily never saw the guy again. I'm currently a senior in college, and this story took place during last year. I'm an engineering major, and have taken some pretty difficult classes in recent years. I always study better in the library or classroom than I do in my room, so I would often go find a place to study and get my work done. I remember that this past spring, finals week was approaching, and I had several big projects due, so one Friday night, I decided to go study in a classroom. I know it's not something most people like to do on a Friday night, but I had some plans for the weekend and wanted to get it done beforehand. I went to the engineering hall at about 9 p.m., and when I arrived, it was locked. When this happened, I could call a security guard, and they would unlock the doors for students if you showed them your ID. Then you could use the building to study. I did this, and when the door was unlocked for me, I entered and saw that nobody else was in there. It was strange being in there with all the lights out at night, and I went down one of the first hallways where there were some classrooms, and I entered the first one, which I happened to have a class in, and I turned on the light. Then, I found a desk, sat down, and began working. I got really focused and was getting a lot done. Maybe about an hour passed when I heard footsteps come out of nowhere. I looked up to see the classroom door open and a guy walk in. The man was wearing a red sweatshirt, jeans, and a baseball cap. He stood in the doorway and asked me if I minded if he studied in there as well. I was sort of annoyed by this, because there were plenty of other classrooms he could go to, and nobody else was here. I didn't even know who this guy was. I told him sure though, because I didn't want to seem like a jerk. He had a backpack and set it down at the first desk in the front of the room. Then he sat down at the desk. I went back to work at my desk, which was more towards the back of the room. I sat at that one because that was where my seat was in class, and I was just more comfortable there. After several minutes, I glanced up at the guy, and I noticed something strange. His backpack was still on the ground next to his desk, and he hadn't taken anything out of it. He was just sitting there in his desk, staring straight forward, it seemed. He wasn't even on his phone. I went back to work, and over time, looked over to him a few more times, and nothing changed. The guy was just making me uncomfortable, and I was losing my focus. Plus, it was getting late, almost 11 p.m., so I decided I would pack it up and leave. I closed my laptop and put it in my backpack, along with my book. I then got up and walked to the door. As I passed by the other guy in the room, I saw that he was still just sitting there, and I could feel his eyes watching me as I left. I walked down the hall and out to the main entrance of the building. That's when I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. I just knew it was the guy, and he was leaving now. Nobody else had been in there. I was getting suspicious of him, and I picked up my pace in walking. I left the building and went out to my car in the parking lot. When I got outside, I noticed there was just one other car in the parking lot, and sure enough, I saw the guy come out the doors and was headed for the car. I drove off to go back to my apartment. It was only about a 5-minute drive, and I lived just a few blocks outside of campus. I drove there with the guy tailing me in his car. I parked in my parking space and got out to go inside. I noticed that the car the guy was in parked a few spaces away from mine, but the guy stayed inside the car. This made me feel a little better for some reason, although I still didn't know what he was doing. But I went inside my apartment and then went up to my window to watch. I knew the guy didn't live here because there were only 8 units, and I had seen everyone else who lived there over the course of the year. Plus, I had never seen his car before. The guy stayed sitting in his car with the lights on for quite some time. So long that even when I was in bed about to fall asleep, I looked out and saw that he was still there. By then, it had to be about 2 a.m. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up, and when I looked out the window, the guy was not there anymore, thankfully. I went outside, and when I did, I noticed on the outside of my front door, near where the lock was, as well as on the side of the door near where it opened, there were noticeable scratches and small dents that hadn't been there before. I think that guy had tried to break into my apartment during the night while I was asleep. I always wondered who he was and why he did this. I'm currently a sophomore in college. This past year, I was living in the dorms and I had a room all to myself. The dorm building that I lived in is pretty old, but it's nice, and I lived on the 3rd floor. I really liked my room because it's the farthest room to the end of the hallway. Over the course of the semester, I got to know a good number of people that lived on my floor, and I ended up making some pretty good friends. But one night, after I got ready for bed, I turned off all my lights and tried to fall asleep. I was just starting to feel nice and relaxed when I started to hear a noise in the hallway off in the distance. Generally, our dorm building was pretty quiet, and I was trying to sleep, so it was slightly annoying. It sounded like someone's phone was doing text-to-speech in the hallway, and I could hear it getting closer towards my room. But as it got closer and closer, I could hear that the voice on the phone was not speaking English. I'm not sure what language it was, but I know it wasn't Spanish either, and I couldn't recognize what it was exactly. To be honest, it didn't really sound like a language at all. I heard it keep getting louder and louder until I could tell that it was right outside my door. This was kind of suspicious because I was the farthest room to the end of the hallway, and I knew it wasn't the guy who lived next to me, so I didn't know why somebody would be outside my door. I listened to try to hear what was going on, but I didn't know what it was. Then I remembered that I hadn't locked my doors. I know it's a bad habit, but I just rarely lock my door unless I'm leaving my dorm room for a long period of time. I started to panic, and then I thought I was going to have a heart attack when I heard the door slowly start to open, and I saw lights start to fill my room, which had been pitch black. I saw someone in the doorway, but they were mostly blocked from my view, with me being in my bed and the door being in the way. I just saw their arm sticking out beyond the door, pointed towards me, holding a phone, which is where the sound was coming from. It was still playing a robotic voice, speaking something that I couldn't understand at all. This continued for several seconds, until they took another step in my room, which revealed them to be what looked like a guy wearing a ski mask. They pointed their phone at me, and I asked what they wanted. They then slowly backed away and left the room. I quickly got up and shut my door and locked it. I had a really hard time falling asleep after that. I tried to tell myself that it was just a college kid pulling a prank, or maybe someone who was drunk, but I just had a strong feeling that it wasn't. I did my best to just forget about it, and eventually I fell asleep. The next day I got an email from the resident assistant of my dorm. It was sent to everyone on my floor with the subject, "Floor Incident." The email went on to say how a suspicious person was seen in the dorm who didn't live there, and asked if we knew anything about it to contact them. I told them my story, but I never heard anything beyond that. I'm a college student, and I don't own a car. Because of this, I walk everywhere around campus. I don't mind this though, because it's good exercise, and the weather is pretty nice all year round in this part of the country. Last year, I worked at one of the buildings for my college job on campus, and one night after a shift, I was walking home from work at about 11 o'clock at night. It was about a 20-minute walk to my apartment, which was a short ways off campus. Once I got off the school campus, things got a lot quieter and darker, which was slightly creepy, but I had done the walk 100 times, so I didn't care. That is, until I noticed what sounded like footsteps behind me. I looked over my shoulder, but I didn't see anyone at all. For whatever reason, I was just a little scared. I walk literally everywhere, and have walked many times at night, so I don't know why this particular time it freaked me out a little bit, but it just did. I continued my walk, and several other times, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I looked, I never saw anyone. It was very dark out, however, so I didn't have a good view behind me, but nevertheless, I just kept walking. Finally, I made it to my place, which was an apartment, but had access to my door from the outside. I went to my door, unlocked it, and went inside. Then I locked my door and started walking to the bathroom to take a shower before bed. Just as I was walking into the bathroom, I heard the doorknob to my front door turn. I immediately got a terrible feeling. I lived alone, and I wasn't expecting anybody, and it came to my mind how I felt like I was being followed all the way home. I didn't hear anything for a few seconds, so I slowly made my way over to the door and peeked out the window. I saw what appeared to be a man walking away, but he was pretty far off by that time. After about 20 minutes, I convinced myself he was gone, and I got ready for bed. I locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, and everything seemed normal until I opened my bedroom door to see that everything in the rest of my apartment was messed up. I immediately got back in my room and locked the door, then I called the police. I felt like an idiot for not calling them the night before. I stayed in my bedroom until they came, but whoever broke into my house was long gone. Somehow they were able to pry my front door open, and I didn't even notice in the night. I'm a really deep sleeper, but I'm still surprised I didn't wake up from it. In the end, I had a few things stolen, but I'm glad I was okay. This story happened several years back when I was in college. I attended a very large and old university, and it was coming to the end of a semester. I decided to go to one of the engineering buildings one night where one of my classrooms were, so I could study for the final test. I had a lot of work to do, and I wanted to be free of all distractions. I was an engineering student, and one of our buildings let you go into the classrooms if there wasn't a class going on, so I went in and began studying. I studied for hours and hours, and in the process, I completely lost track of time. I started at about 8 p.m., and I ended up making a lot of good progress and was almost done when I heard a knock come from the door I was at. I was a little bit startled, but I thought maybe a janitor wanted to clean the room I was in or something. I looked at the clock and saw it was just past midnight. Nobody had been in the building at all when I got there, so I looked out the door, but I didn't see anybody. I thought it was a little strange, so I walked over to the door and looked out. The hallway was completely empty. Then I opened the door and looked out of it into the mostly dark hallway. Then, as my eyes looked to the end of the hall about 50 feet away, I saw a man's head peeking out almost sideways from around the corner. He was smiling at me in the creepiest way. He looked to be at least 40 years old. It was a very creepy sight, and the way he was smiling with his eyes so wide at me, he looked to be completely insane. Then, he slowly stuck his head out farther and farther from the corner, and I saw that he appeared to be wearing a suit and a tie. It just seemed so odd and creepy. He kept his eyes locked on mine for a good 5 to 10 seconds. Then, he suddenly jolted back behind the wall where he was. I had no interest in staying in that building any longer. I quickly went back into the classroom and gathered my things into my backpack. I walked out into the hall and made sure that the man wasn't there. I walked as fast as I could down the hallway and out of the building. Once I got outside, I felt much safer. I started walking quickly through campus to get back to my place, but before I got too far away from the building, I turned around and looked back at it. I saw in the second floor front window, the man was there. He was looking at me with the same creepy smile and wide eyes, and slowly waving at me. I turned and ran all the way back home. Every time I had to go back to that building for a class after that, I was always a little creeped out. I never went back to that building at night again. Last year, I was a freshman in college. I lived in a dorm by myself. I enjoyed not having a roommate because I had more space to myself and could come and go as I pleased. The dorm building was very old, and I lived on the 4th floor. My hallway was almost all people without roommates, so it was pretty quiet most of the time. One night, I was doing some studying late at night at my desk. At about 11 p.m., I turned off my lamp and decided to go to bed. But right after I turned my light off, I heard a noise come from the corner of my room. I turned my light right back on. It was my water bottle falling off my dresser. I was so confused as to how this could have happened. It couldn't have been the wind because my window was closed. I went over and put my bottle back on the dresser and then went to go brush my teeth. When I came back, the bottle was on the floor again. I was a little bit creeped out. I moved the bottle and then got in bed to go to sleep. Just when I was getting really relaxed and about to fall asleep, I heard my doorknob being turned. I looked up to see the door being opened slowly. Now I was extremely creeped out. I had locked the door like I always do when I got back. I walked out and looked into the hallway. It was empty. I went back to my room and shut the door and turned all of the lights on. I wasn't able to fall asleep for about another hour. The next day, I told some of the guys that live on my floor what happened, and they said that some similar things have happened to them. The college campus I live on is very old and is said to be haunted. I have always been skeptical about that sort of stuff, but what I witnessed I have no explanation for. I went to a private university in college. It was very nice and I really enjoyed going there, but I will never forget this creepy incident. One day, I got back from the cafeteria at about 7 p.m. As I was walking up to my dorm room, I saw a man walking in the hallways. I should mention that I am a female, and my entire dorm building was female only. I guessed he was just visiting somebody, which is not that strange at all, but the weird part was that the man appeared to be in his 30s. Nevertheless, I ignored him and walked to my room. It was a Friday, and my roommate had gone home for the weekend. I got all my homework done for the weekend, and then started watching Netflix. About an hour into that, I left my room to go to the bathroom. It was right across the hall, which was very nice. I got back to my room and unpaused my show and got back into it. 10 minutes or so went by, and I heard something from the other side of my room. I was too focused on the show to really notice it. That is, until I heard it again, and this time it was louder. I turned my head to see what it was, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It was a man coming out from behind my roommate's desk. In fact, it was the man that I saw in the hallway earlier. He had a smile on his face and was walking right towards me. I screamed and ran for the door as fast as I could. I was just barely able to make it out of my room, and I slammed the door on the man behind me and ran away down the hall. He did not chase after me. I heard him yell at me that it was a mistake and he thought that I was someone else. I wasn't buying that from the creepy smile he had on his face. I ran to a friend's dorm who lived on the floor above mine, and we called the campus police. It didn't take long for them to arrive, and they found the man leaving the building when they got there. It turns out someone let him in the building, and he got in my room because I had left my door unlocked when I went to use the restroom. I am a senior in college currently. This story happened to me when I was a sophomore. It was the beginning of the second semester of classes. I lived in a pretty standard dorm building at the time. It had 5 floors and a basement. The dorms were pretty old, and the basement was known to be very creepy. The laundry room was down there for kids on the first 2 floors, so I had to use them. One night, I was playing video games in my room and decided to do my laundry. The laundry room was right at the bottom of the stairs and was basically the only room that people used in the basement. The rest of it was just hallways and rooms used as storage, and it was very dark and creepy. I went down, put my stuff in the laundry, and then went back up to set the timer and continue gaming. When my timer went off 40 minutes later, I went back down to get my laundry. But when I arrived in the laundry room, I saw that the washer had been opened and all of my clothes had been thrown around. I was pretty angry about this, and I looked around but didn't see anybody. Then, I heard the sound of laughter coming from outside the room. I walked over to the hallway. It was dark, but I saw a man about 30 feet away down the hall, standing there smiling and laughing, holding one of my socks and waving it around. He had to be at least 40 years old, and he looked completely insane. He started to walk towards me. I turned and went up the stairs. I ran to my RA's room and knocked, but he didn't answer. It was pretty late at night, and I figured he was asleep, so I decided to call the campus police instead. I went to my room and called them, and they said they would have somebody on the way. Just when I hung up, I heard the door to my room jiggle. I went over and looked out the peephole. The man was there. He started banging on my door. I looked around my room to try to find a weapon. Then I heard the noises of people shouting in the hall. I walked over to the door again and saw the man in a struggle with about 2 students. I went out and tried to help them. The man put up a fight, but eventually we were able to overpower him. The police arrived and took him away shortly after. It turned out to be a crazy homeless man that was on drugs. Nobody knows how he was able to sneak into the dorms, though. I'm going to tell you about my scariest memory of college. I went to college about 20 years ago, and this happened during the first semester of my freshman year. It was nighttime, about 9 p.m. I was in my dorm, which had 6 floors of rooms and a few lounges here and there. I lived with my roommate, who was a pretty cool guy, on the first floor. On this night, I had to print a homework assignment, and the only printers were downstairs in the lobby, so I went downstairs to take care of that. When I got down there, I saw a man standing in the doorway. Outside. I noticed he looked much older than most of the college students. That is, until I saw the pizza in his hand and realized that he was a pizza man. It was pretty common for college kids to order pizza to the dorms. He waved at me and I shook my head to say no, I was not there for the pizza. But then he knocked on the door and urged me over. I went to the door and opened it. I told him that I didn't order pizza. He said that was fine, but the kid who ordered had him delivered to his room and he needed to get in the building. I know how strange that sounded looking back, but I was much younger then and I didn't think much of it at the time. He walked away and I went back to printing my assignment. Once I finished, I went back to my room. My roommate and I hung out and played some video games until about 11 when we got tired, so we shut out the lights to go to sleep. I awoke sometime later to the sound of our doorknob being twisted. I was confused and I looked at my roommate's bed to see if it was him. He was still sleeping. I decided to try to ignore the sound and go back to sleep, but it didn't stop. After a few minutes, I started to get concerned. I got out of bed to look out to see who it was. Then I saw it was the pizza man that I had let in the building. I had no idea why he was trying to get in my room. I went over to wake up my roommate. I shook him and he was very confused at first. He sat up and just then our door opened up. The man started to walk in, but looked surprised to see us both awake. My roommate shouted at the man to leave. He responded by saying he wasn't going to and we had to do what he said. Then he showed us a bag he was carrying and told us we did not want to know what he had in there. I took this as some sort of a threat. I didn't know quite what to do. Then my roommate started towards our window, which happened to be open slightly because it was a hot night. He pushed it open farther and jumped out. I saw the man start to pursue, and without even thinking, I followed my roommate out the window. We ran around campus and saw the man chasing after us. We kept going as fast as we could until we found a better lit street and were able to see a campus patrol car. He saw us in a panic and stopped. At this point, the man was gone from chasing us. We explained the situation and more police were called to the dorm building to look around. After the search, though, the man was not found and he was able to get away. I felt bad for letting him into the building, but I'm glad nobody got hurt.